And it is my absolute pleasure to welcome to the stage Nick Petrie, who is a leadership consultant. And this session is around workplace balance and how to perform at a high level without burning out. Nick is a researcher and speaker on leadership, resilience and burnout prevention. He helps organisations prepare for the future by creating cutting-edge leadership solutions that help leaders be more adaptable, resilient and strategic. He has worked globally across industries including engineering, tech, banking, pharmaceuticals, energy, law, accounting, construction and television. He holds a master's degree from Harvard University and is the author of a book, Work Without Stress, Building Resilience for Long-Term Success. In this session, Nick will lead a workplace balance assessment to look at key measures to be effective in the modern world of work and life. Please make him welcome Nick Petrie.
Okay, we start with a question, and the question is, are you awake right now? And many of you are laughing because you're thinking, of course I'm awake, but are you? So researchers who study the brain estimate that people spend up to 70% of their day in a state called waking sleep. This is when you're in the conference room, but not really. You are thinking about what you're going to do tonight after you get out of here. You're thinking about what you did earlier this morning. You're deep in your emails and thinking about what's going on at work. Are you actually awake? When you're in this state, it's actually called waking sleep. You're in a dream. And it turns out that this makes a big difference in your ability to perform, to learn from the experiences you're having, and in particular, your risk of burnout. So to start the session, I'm going to invite you to actually wake up. And the way you do that is very simple. You come to your senses, what you can see, smell, taste, feel, hear. So just sit comfortably, keep your eyes open for this. First thing I'll invite you to do is take a deep breath. And as you do, and you can let it out, just notice what you can feel in your body right now. So take a few breaths. What do you notice in your body right this moment? Wiggle your toes a little. Notice the sensation on the ground. Next, listen to the sounds you can hear around you right this moment. Third, look around the room. Notice some colours, some patterns you hadn't really noticed before. Now do all three things at once. Notice what you can feel, notice what you can hear, and notice what you can see. Okay, bring your attention back up here now. And what I can notice as I look around the room is that everyone right this moment appears to be wide awake. And that is not always the case. And it turns out it's going to make a big difference. Your state of wakefulness or waking sleep is going to affect your experience of work, your experience of life, and others' experience of you. Because people can notice if you're awake or not. Right? Your co-workers can notice it. Your spouse can notice it. Your children can notice it, whether you're awake or asleep. And it makes a big impact on your experience of work. So, you've done a lot of listening, I've seen this morning. You've been good at listening. We want to get you talking a little bit. So the question I want you to reflect on is, what has your experience of your work been like in the last 4 weeks? All right, so some people laughing, that's one sign. What has your experience of work been like in the past 4 weeks? So I want you to think about in terms of how motivated you're feeling, how stressed you're feeling, your energy levels, how much you're learning or not. What has it been like for you the last 4 weeks of doing your work? And so to get you just sort of warmed up and talking about, I want you to think of a few words to describe it or a few sentences. how would you describe it in a few words or a few sentences? And then turn to the people at your table, and you'll just have about a couple of minutes for this, but just share with each other, what are some words to describe the experiences you've been having? Words or adjectives. So go ahead, turn to the people at your table, have a short discussion. Okay, pause there. All right, pause conversations. Can we just have a few people yell out some words that came up at your tables?
Growth.
What was it?
Growth.
Growth, okay. Growth. Others? Stretch. Confronting, yep. Busy. Challenge. Engaged, okay, so we're getting a bit of a flavour. So different people are experiencing different things, and this is going to be the topic of this session here. What is people's experience of work, and how does it impact them in the short term and the long term? In the last 3 years, I've been leading a global research project with partners from Netflix, Uber, Workday, Manchester City Football, Boston Red Sox, and a number of other organisations. And we've been looking at this question. What are people experiencing at work? How does it affect their performance, their growth, and their risk of burnout? The origins of the research happened at the start of the pandemic. I was working in the US with a lot of companies there. And when the pandemic hit, if you can remember what that was like, it was a massive change for people. And the first thing which happened for people was there was all this new stuff you needed to do. People needed to learn how to lead remotely, work from home, lead through a global pandemic. It was all stuff none of us had ever done before. And so it was massively stimulating and taxing on people's nervous system. So everyone had to grow really quickly, if you can remember that time. Second challenge was, though, while we all needed to grow, everyone needed to perform right now. It was like, get stuff done. There's this massive workload. It's a crisis. Work harder, work faster. Customers needed this, stakeholders needed this, the board needed this, and everyone was going very hard. And the people I was working with and the clients I had really good work ethic. So what they started doing was they just started pushing hard and working extremely hard. And it worked. Like, productivity actually went up at the start of the pandemic. Teams became more productive, and people were just pushing. They were working earlier, they were working later, they stopped having breaks, many of them stopped having lunch breaks, and it worked. The problem is, as one CEO said to me over in the US, he said, I actually quite enjoy a crisis. I find them quite stimulating, quite challenging. But he said, Nick, they usually only go for about a month. And then you sort of pull back and you recover and it goes back to normal. He said, that hasn't happened. It's just gone on and on. And when he was talking to me, it was 9 months into it. He didn't realize it was still going. And so what started to happen with a lot of the clients I was working with is they started to get overextended. They ended up in a state called allostatic overload, where your body is lending you energy through fight or flight hormones to keep you going. You're in this massive challenge state. The problem is there's very expensive energy. It's like an overdraft from the bank. You are supposed to repay it, but no one was repaying it. And it's ongoing now. So what started to happen is people started, very high performers, either burning out or just getting to the point where they said, I just don't want to go on, or I can't go on. And people were quitting, or they were falling over, or they were staying, but they were suboptimal. They couldn't perform properly. And so it was just everywhere. And I had global clients and was seeing it all over the world. And so we got this research team together to see what could we do. First thing, we looked at organizations. How were they handling it? What were they doing? And so what most organizations did, they put on workshops, formal development, how not to get stressed, how to meditate, nutrition, sleep, here's a how to do yoga, here's a meditation app. It was all very good stuff. It was very beneficial and it was high quality. But it usually only goes formal development for about 20 hours a year for most people in organizations. And the problem was, for the leaders I was working with, after that was over, they had to go back to work for 2,000 hours of on-the-job experiences. And this is where all their problems were. Their problems weren't in the workshops, it was on the job. And what most people were discovering was the way they were working wasn't working. And so our research team was saying, that's where we've got to focus, on the 2,000 hours. What are people experiencing in that period there? And the good news was there wasn't much competition because all the consultants were building these workshops over here, so it was just us looking at the 2,000 hours and how are people going to work so they can perform and they can grow, but they can do it in a sustainable way. It's a long game, this work or your career. You might be able to work the way you are for 12 months, 18 months, but can you do it ongoing? It's a long game. So what we decided to do, we had pretty vast and diverse networks. So we said, let's get outside of business. Let's look at fields where people need to work at sustained, at high levels. And so we interviewed Navy SEALs, CIA agents, FBI agents, surgeons, professional athletes, professional coaches, yoga instructors, priests, lots of different people, and then lots of business people, to see what we could learn about performing and growing in a sustainable way or what causes burnout. And so we learnt a lot from this and a lot of insights over the last 3 years. And what I'd like to do in today's session is sort of condense it down and give you some of the practical insights we took out of it, things you can take away and start implementing today for yourself, but also your teams or in your organizations. A key part of it, we created an assessment, which sort of gets you focused on one of your favorite subjects, probably yourself, and it will give you the insights applied to you. So just checking how many people filled out the assessment, just raise your hand. All right, pretty good. Bring it out now if you've got it on paper or on your phone or whatever. If you haven't filled it out, it's okay. I will leave it live for 48 hours. So you can fill it out in the next 48 hours. One request, please don't send the assessment link out, broadcast it to everyone in your organization. It's for the people in the room or all the people in your team. If you want to use it, you can. Just get in contact with me and we'll set your organization up properly. Okay. So what we found once we got all the insights, one of the fastest, best ways to help people understand it was to have them apply it to themselves through this assessment. So I'm going to take you through your results now and what they mean. Okay, here goes. All right, so what causes people to go towards thriving or burning? There were lots of different measures we saw, but we saw there were 4 which were very predictive. First one was your values alignment. When we interviewed people, it turned out it made a massive difference whether the work you are doing at the moment is aligned with your values or misaligned. Second, is the work intrinsically motivating to you? People give a lot of energy to their work. Do you get a lot of energy back from it? Or do you find it draining? Third, performance growth balance. Is most of your work focused on very familiar things which just require you to deliver right now? Or does it actually require you to do a whole lot of stuff you've never done before which forces you to grow? What's your balance like at the moment? Turns out that makes a massive difference. And the last one, burnout risk. We worked out there were sort of 8 factors which predictably started to point to how much of a risk you're in. All right, one thing I just noticed as the assessments came through, there can be a bias if you're worried about who was going to see them or anything like that. So just take into account how honestly you answered. Should your scores be a little more one way or the other as you filled it in? All right, with that, let's go into it. First section, intrinsic motivation. So remember we asked you to write down what are the actual things you're working on at the moment, and then we asked you to rate how motivating are they on these factors. What do you see when you look at your scores? Which are your lowest ones? And what impact does that have on your level of motivation? Which are your high ones? How would it change your experience of work and your performance if your intrinsic motivation went up a couple of notches? Often that makes a dramatic difference. So that's on the individual level, looking at the individual items. If you look at your overall level, what's the message that you see? This is very much around how much energy you're giving and how much you're getting back. When you are energetically giving a lot to your work but not much is coming back because it's not very motivating, that's when you can end up in that allostatic overload. You're in energetic debt. All right, so what's the message from your first section, intrinsic motivation? Can you think of a time in your career when this was extremely high? Remember what that was like? Or extremely low? All right, second section, values alignment. What we saw when we interviewed people was that when their values alignment was very low, the sort of work they were doing was misaligned with their important values, people were at high risk of burning out. We heard that story over and over again. Interestingly, there was a second group who was also at risk of burning out in relation to values alignment. Any guesses who else might be at risk? Highly aligned. Why would they be at risk?
Because they give too much.
Right. So that's exactly right. So it was a big surprise for us. If your values are highly aligned with the sort of work you're doing, that is good because it means that you have a lot of energy for the work you're doing. You feel quite coherent. However, we saw this with surgeons, nurses, many people in non-for-profit sectors, but just people who loved their jobs. They were also at risk because they would give so much to their work and often they couldn't switch off. They fused their identity with their work. They would go home in the evenings. They couldn't stop or wouldn't stop. So if your values alignment is high, that is good, and you must pay a lot of attention to that final section around burnout risk. This is like the accelerator. You need to know how to use the brakes in that final section on burnout risk. Otherwise, your car's going to go fast and can't stop. All right, what was the message from your values alignment? What did you see there? All right. The third one was very interesting to us. In the first year of the pandemic, what happened to me was I was focused previously on resilience and stress, had written a book on it, and I got all of these inquiries from people saying, Nick, everyone's stressed, could you come in and do these workshops? So I went in, ran these workshops, I knew the content really well, I could do a big job, it was very familiar to me. And I must have done hundreds in that first year. And at the end of the year, I looked back, and one, I felt I was exhausted, but two, I looked back and thought, I have not learned a single thing all year. if anything, I think I've gone backwards in my career. I did a good job, but I've gone backwards. I was exactly in perform mode. So this is when you're exploiting the skills, knowledge, attributes you've built up over time. You're doing a good job, you feel pretty confident, but you are not learning anything new. Can you think of a time in your career when you're in this mode? I saw the scores coming through. Many of you are exactly in this mode. And it has advantages because you can do a good job, but it means you're going on a trajectory where you might plateau, or more commonly, people start to go backwards. The second year after the pandemic, I decided to get completely out of delivery, and I just focused on this research, and I just explored with the research team. We did all these interviews. We didn't know what we were doing. We were in high exploration mode. We were learning so much, but we're sort of doing a bad job. It was pretty clunky because it was all new to us. I look back at the end of that year. It was a bit messy, but I grew enormously. I was in high growth mode. I wasn't really exploiting anything I already knew. Can you think of a time in your career when you're in high growth mode? Sometimes these feel like heat experiences. A heat experience is when you're having a first-time experience. You've never done it before, never seen it before. Results matter. There's a chance of success, a chance of failure. People are watching to see how you perform, and they feel incredibly uncomfortable. When we interviewed people about times in their life when they grew the most, that's what they described. We said, what was it like? They said, it was awful. I hated it. I didn't want it. My boss made me do it, or I got thrown into this situation, or I did want to do it, but I was completely over my head. I felt incompetent. I felt embarrassed. That's often what it feels like to be in high growth mode. Can you think of a time in your career when you're in high growth mode? All right, what is your balance like at the moment? And what's the impact of that for you? It turns out that balance is going to make a big difference for your career. There's no right or wrong, but there might be a more or less important way for you to be at the moment. So have a look at that one. What do you see? For many of you, it's like this. For others, it's like this. So you put those three things together. We're going to come to the burnout section later, but put those three things together. Some people, if you drew them as a circle, some people look like this. Others look like this. Others look like this. What do your scores look like? And how does that reflect your experience of work at the moment? Okay, I'm going to stop talking, give you a chance to reflect on what you've seen so far. If you haven't done the assessment, it's sort of intuitive. I'm sure you can work it out at the moment, what your scores might look like. Here's some questions for you to reflect on your own for a minute. Okay, write some notes to yourself or just reflect on these questions. How do your numbers look at the moment? Does that explain a little of how you're feeling at the moment, what you're experiencing? How's your balance helping or hindering you at the moment? And what questions are coming up for you? Okay, take a minute, write some notes, or just reflect for yourself. What are you seeing? What are you experiencing? All right. When your table is ready, turn to each other and describe a little bit. You don't have to share your results, but you're welcome to. But at least talk about what do you notice in relation to these questions and your results so far. Okay, go ahead.
the research that you did, was there any evidence around a key stage of life that presented itself, like people who are what I refer to as in the trenches with like young kids, career-driven?
Yes.
What were the themes that sort of got presented out of that?
Definitely.
Or is that a discussion for
No, it's perfect.
after?
Do you want to ask that question when? Yeah, no. A lot of people will be.
I'll put it to you.
A lot of people will be like, no, please do ask. Do we have microphones? Yeah, are there? Okay. All right, so let's bring the conversations to a close. There will be more time for conversations. As I was wandering around, there were some great questions which were coming up and some interesting insights people were having. Thank you. I wonder if we could just hear from a few different tables. The way we'll do this, we'll just choose a spokesperson for each table. We won't go around every table, but just so we can hear a few comments from different tables. So if everyone, to choose your spokesperson, if you could just raise your hand, point your finger at the ceiling, just everyone go ahead, point at the ceiling. Fingers up in the air, point at the ceiling. And on the count of three, I want you to point to the person you think would be a good spokesperson for your table. 1, 2, 3, point. Okay. Could we just hear from a few tables what sort of flavour of things people were talking about at your tables? Got some spokespeople? Point to your spokesperson. Feel free. Here we go. Okay, we'll go over here. Start with thank you. Mike, yes. We'll never hear you otherwise.
Kia ora. So we talked a bit about the kind of growth versus performance and how it shows up in our roles, and everyone in the table kind of being in a different position career-wise and changing roles, and kind of how you need to rely on those different elements in different times in your career. Like I'll use Emma and myself as an example, if that's okay, Emma. So we're both consultants on the same team and we're delivering the same work to the beautiful people in the room. And I'm probably bigger in this performance side of things because I've been in this role for 18 months. And so, been really connected to the PAS sector and the work that we're doing. And Emma's just stepped into this role in the last 5 months. So she's bigger in the growth zone. And we just commented that I think that actually works really well for us as individuals, but also as a team, because as a team, we're pretty well balanced. So yeah, that was our reflection.
Very good. Thank you. All right, good. Other tables, spokespeople, feel free to point at them. Yep, down the back. Okay, we've got one. Thank you, Jenny May. All right, looks like someone got pointed out by Jenny May. There we go.
Thank you. What were we talking about, Brent Sheldrake? I think we were just talking about our roles basically and the variety that we have in them, but the need over time to break that up and have some different experiences as well, especially when you've been in a role for a very long period of time. Yeah, so sharing things around and mixing things up.
Good. One of the patterns we saw in the research is people would get into this perform mode where they're exploiting the skills they've got, and they would stay in that mode for a long time, years and years and years. And it was pretty comfortable, it was pretty easy, but the risk is your capacity is not increasing. There's nothing new that you can do next year that you couldn't do last year. So watch out, it can be a risk factor, it can be appropriate. Some of the executive teams I work with, they've got 50 years of experience they've built up. And it's actually probably appropriate. They just exploit all of that experience. They need to learn a bit, but not as much as someone who's in their 20s, who probably should be all in on growth. So it does change throughout your career. There was a question over here as well, I know you wanted to ask.
Yeah, okay.
Do you want to hold this?
Yeah, that's fine. I would like to put this through the app, but that's okay. Look, we were just having a chat about what the ages, stages and phases of life does in terms of the themes that might have been presented through some of the research that you did. Basically, I think you alluded to it on early career, all in on growth, mid-career when you're probably balancing some growth in the family, so to speak, growth in career, potentially stepping into leadership positions, how you manage the tensions that are across that sort of thing as well as the career focus.
Yes. Think about different stages of your career and what's changed. I interviewed a surgeon, and one of the things which stuck in my mind, he says in surgery, he said, no one burns out on the way up. You're learning all this new stuff, you're getting higher and higher positions. He said, no one burns out late stage of their career. He said, everyone burns out in the middle. And he said, is that true for other industries? I was like, that's interesting, is it? Some of the patterns we noticed in the research was, one reason it's very tricky is because the things which make you successful in your career at the start are the same things which burn you out in the middle or later on. So we interviewed people who basically their mindset was work hard, push through, never fail, always deliver, give 100% at all times. And that worked really well. You know, they got into university, they passed it, they got a good job, they had that mentality, push 100% all the time, and they got promoted, they got a bigger job, they got more money, their companies loved it, so they doubled down again on that mindset, keep going and going and going. But then slowly their life started to change. Some of them had kids, some of them had families, some of them got mortgages, some of them got much bigger roles with direct reports and stakeholders, and life just got bigger and bigger and bigger, but their mindset didn't evolve. They had the same success formula they did when they were 21 years old. So one of the things to watch out for is, are you evolving as well? The people who we met who were very successful, higher in the organisation, they were still high performers, but they weren't working the same way they did earlier in their career. Their mindset had evolved. Okay, so hopefully a few insights for you so far. Note them down. Let's take you into the next section, which is that third one, around burnout, risk or thriving. When we began this project, I was mainly interested in the growth part because I thought that's really interesting. How do people grow? But we just did interview after interview where people were telling, high performers were telling us the stories about how they had just pushed themselves, overextended and burned out. It was so common. We were all very surprised. So a few things we learned about it and how to avoid it, what to do about it if you want to be a high performer who can work sustainably. First thing we saw was when you were starting to get overextended and getting into that state of allostatic overload, you will get warning signs. You'll get them through how you're feeling, the sorts of behaviours that you're starting to do, and physically you will get warning signs. So those are some of the quotes from different people. You'll also see some things starting to happen in your life probably when you're well overextended. Work starts to crowd out everything else. Your identity starts to fuse with your career and your work. We heard a lot of people just saying they just put themselves last. They felt selfish if they did anything for themselves. So with the people we studied who were high performers, they were diligent, they were hardworking, had a great work ethic, when this started to happen to them, and these signs started to show up, and they started to become less effective, what do you think they did in response? That's exactly right, both tables. Did they sort of adjust and think, do I need to make some changes? Do I need to set some boundaries? Do I do anything different? No. All of them worked harder because they felt I'm becoming unproductive. I'm not getting as much done as I used to. And the reason is because their body was starting to shut down. Their brain was starting to become less effective. Their solution was to work harder. That was incredibly common. And one thing we learned is we are really not very good at noticing the warning signs. Other people around you are better at seeing changes for you than the individuals themselves. The question is, does it feel safe enough for them to say something? And often the answer was no. Another reason it was sort of hard for people was because when we think about burnout, and this was true for me actually after the first year of the pandemic, I could notice something was off with me. But when I looked at these things on burnout, I just thought, well, you're burning out or you're not, and I'm not, therefore I guess I'm fine, I'm still getting stuff done. But when we interviewed people, we saw there were actually 3 stages of burn. It wasn't an either or black and white thing. First stage was when people were experiencing stress, there was a lot of pressure on them, but they were still getting things done, they were still productive, they were just feeling stressed. Second degree though, it was starting to become chronic. The stress was never going away. They were starting to feel overwhelmed, and they were sort of just in survival mode at work. And then the third degree of burn is sort of what we often think about. This is when your body actually starts to shut down. Why this is helpful to know is because it's a bit of a slippery slope, and it's very good if you can course correct early. Do a few things when you're starting to experience first degree burn. It's also important for managers and workplaces to know, because we heard stories over and over again of people who are experiencing third degree burn and getting offered a meditation app, take a day off, learn to meditate, do some exercise. That's all great solutions for first degree burn. But the problem is lots of managers and lots of workplaces were offering those things for people in third degree, and we heard from them it felt like they were being gaslit. So pay attention to, do we have different solutions at different levels? All right, so overall, when we did the interviews, and this is particularly at the individual level rather than the organisational level, we did also see there were big organisational factors which made a difference. Most common ones was when there was toxicity in the workplace, unsupportive bosses, lack of resources, wrong job scoping. 2 people leave the workplace and their job gets given to the remaining person, and that person has a great work ethic, so they just push through until their hair starts falling out. So these ones here are most common at the individual level. So these are the ones you filled out in your assessment. So if you look at your assessment results, for this last section, what did you notice here? I noticed in the assessments, a lot of you had quite high values alignment and motivation, but also quite high on these factors here. Of these, which one's highest for you? And what is the impact of the scores you've got at the moment? Okay, so in the research we're quite interested in, could we provide solutions, find solutions for people which addressed a lot of these at once. So I want to give you a couple of ideas that we heard which we found incredibly useful, and a lot of people and organisations we've shared this with have started doing these things. So it turns out it's not exactly rest which people need, it is switching out of that work mode which people get stuck in. So one person I interviewed, probably the best person I interviewed, was this executive from Amazon. And he's in Seattle at headquarters, Vivek Rao. And when I interviewed him, he said, Amazon is a pretty intense culture. He said, anyone who lasts at Amazon for 3 years is considered a veteran. And I said, really? I said, how long have you been here? And he said, I've been here 10 years. And I said, well, how did you last so long without burning out? And he said, well, I didn't. I did burn out, but then I made some changes. And I said, oh, okay, tell me, what did you do? So he said, well, one of the first things I did, at Amazon they have things called mechanisms. So they don't rely on willpower, they create workplace mechanisms which sort of get people to behave in ways that they believe will be most effective. So for example, there are no PowerPoint slides at Amazon. If you are going to present in a meeting, you need to write a press release. It's a page and a half about what you want to get across to people. No one needs to read it beforehand. When they come into the meeting, everyone gets a copy of your press release. They sit quietly, they read it for 10 minutes, and then after that, questions are going to come at you. And that's how they run their meetings. That's a mechanism for running meetings. He says, so I decided, he said, one of my problems is I find it very hard to take vacations and switch off, and I burned out. So he said, I created a mechanism called the 1-1-1 mechanism. He said, what I am very good at doing is following my calendar. If it is in my calendar, I will do it. And so he said the 1-1-1 mechanism was, at the start of the year, he would put in his calendar every year, he would put in his calendar one long extended vacation, every quarter, one short vacation, and every month, 1 day off. He says it's a mechanism which forces him to rest and recharge. And he says, I always do it because it's in my calendar. I was like, that's really quite simple and easy. And I noticed for me, I was not good at taking vacations either. So inspired by him, we went on a long vacation last Christmas, probably the first long one I've done in a long time. We went up to Ahipara, my wife Sarah and our 4 boys, and we went surfing. And the kids all got off screens for the first time since I feel like I've known them. And we just went surfing every day. And the kids just wanted to go every day, Dad, can we go surfing? And we all got in, all 6 of us in the water, splashing around. And it was exceptional. And I came back and I felt really recharged in a way I hadn't been previously. How about for you? What do you like with taking breaks? Could the 1-1-1 mechanism or some version of it work for you? Okay, so that was one. The second one he told me I thought was even better, much better in fact. He said, when I was reading the research, one thing we saw in terms of your recovery, people pushing themselves out hard at work, what do you do for recovery? And in the research they pointed out there's 3 different types of recovery. There is passive recovery, sitting on the sofa, watching Netflix, streaming something. That's one type. There is learning recovery, where you're going to learn a language, you're going to learn to do some new activity, learn to play guitar, something like that. And then there is active recovery, where you're going to do something physical or something which completely engages you. Musical instruments, nature, exercise. 3 types of recovery: passive, learning, and active. And it turned out in the research, only one of them was very effective. Which one do you think was the most effective? If we just did a vote in the room, think about your life experience. Do you think, who thinks the most effective one is passive, sitting, streaming something at home, watching? Interesting. All right, here we go. It's one. All right, so it works for some. Who thinks it's learning? It's going and doing an activity where you're really trying to learn something? Okay. Who thinks it's active? Interesting. Very interesting, right? Smart group, because in the research, that's the type they found was the most effective. It doesn't mean that the other ones won't work for different individuals. We're all different, but overall, active was the most effective. And let's look at the reason why. So when I spoke to Vivek, I said, "What else did you do, Vivek, that was really helpful?" And he looked at me for a while, and then he said, "Dancing." And I said, "What do you mean, dancing?" And he says, "Argentinian tango, to be precise." I said, "Okay, this is not what I'm expecting from an Amazon executive, but go on." And he said, "Well, what used to happen before I burned out," he said, "I would work really hard all day. I'm very logical, solving problems. I'd go home at night. I'd still be in my head. I'd still be solving problems. I'd do emails. I'm still thinking things through. And then I burned out." And so he said, "I realized I needed to do something to break out of it." So he said, "I tried a few different things, but I tried Argentinian tango, and what I discovered was that in Argentinian tango, you cannot be in your head. You must be in your heart, and you must be in your body. Two places I never am during my workday." He said, "Also, the currency of Argentinian tango is the opposite of my work world." He said, "In Argentinian tango, no one cares how much money you make. They don't care what your job title is. They don't even care if you have a job. It's irrelevant to them. The only currency that matters is, can you dance? And can you communicate through your body to your partner?" So he said, "I go to Argentinian tango, I'm moving, I'm listening to the music, I'm sweating, I'm communicating with my partner, and I'm just completely absorbed in my body. And my work brain is gone. My Amazon identity is gone. All I am is this dancer." And he said, "I finish that, I go home, I'm sweating, I feel completely recharged, and I get up the next day and I feel great in a way I never usually do." He said, "It's sort of like my opposite world." And I went, "Interesting." And then we kept interviewing. We heard over and over again this pattern of the opposite world. People who were pushing themselves really hard during the day but could do that without burning out had an opposite world they went to. Someone I interviewed, a Scotsman who was an expat living overseas, burned out, and then he picked up the bagpipes for the first time in 20 years, and he said, "When I did, I'd go up to the back shed and I'd play my bagpipes, and it took me back to when I was a little boy with my granddad playing back in Scotland, would play the bagpipes, and I'd sit on my dad's lap. And then my dad taught me how to play them." And he said, "I picked them up for the first time, and I go up there in the evenings now, and everyone says, 'Dad's going up to play the bagpipes.'" And then he said, my little son, he watched me and he said, "Dad, can you teach me how to play the bagpipes?" He said, "It takes me back to my heritage, it switches me off, it gets me out of work." We heard this over and over. An investment banker who started quilting. Someone from one of the big I'll tell you in a sec. But sometimes, one person I interviewed, they said, I said, "What's your opposite world?" to her, told her the stories, and she said, "It's going to the gym." And I said, "Oh, okay, good." And she goes, "The weird thing is, when I come back from the gym, I feel exhausted. I just lie down on the sofa and I just want to sleep." I said, "Oh, okay, what gym do you go to?" And she said, F45. I was like, "Okay, what's that like?" She goes, "Oh, you go along and you basically compete against other people. So you can see their scores, they can see your scores, you're trying to get higher than them, you sort of trying to," and I'm just like, "Come on, you can do it." And I said, "Okay, how different is that from your work day?" She said, "It's exactly the same." And I said, "Well, what do you think might be different?" She thought about it for a while and she said, "Ocean water swimming. When I ocean water swim, everything goes quiet, my brain goes quiet, and I just see the creatures on the bottom of the ocean, and my brain just goes quiet for an hour." She said, "That's my opposite world." So, I wrote a post on this, so I'm going to invite you to think about, what is your opposite world? Do you have one? I wrote a post on the opposite world idea on LinkedIn, and it got 1 million views, I think it was, or something like that. It had hundreds of responses of people putting what their opposite worlds were on it. So I went through and themed the first 200 or so comments to see, are there categories that they fall into? And I noticed there were. A lot of people, it's in this physical bucket as their opposite world that's very different. Nature was the second most common, then artistic, home projects, animals, volunteering. I showed this to one person at one of the big technology companies, and when she saw this, she goes, that makes so much sense. She said she told me her opposite world was knitting. She said, I don't want to say anything, but it's knitting. You know, I go and I do this technology stuff, then I come home and I knit, and it just switches me off. And then she goes, but when she saw this, she also realized her second opposite world was camping. When she goes into nature and camps, she said it's very relaxing for her, and she goes, oh my God, when I put them together, that's what happens. She goes, occasionally I go camping with the family and I sit there, but I take my needles and I sit out there in nature and I knit. And I come back and I've never felt so recharged. So combining these together, one activity which does multiple ones tends to be particularly beneficial. All right, so for you, do you have an opposite world? Do you have a version of the 1-1-1 recovery? Or could you create something like this? Give it some thought. With regards to the opposite world, some people often, about half the room says, no, I don't. Half the room says yes. And some people say, I used to, but I stopped doing it because life got too busy. I would say it is a priority based on what we've seen in the research to put it back in. Find your opposite world and put it back in. Okay, at your tables, I want you to have a conversation, 5 or so minutes. Do you have an opposite world? Do you have a 1-1-1? What is it, and what does it do for you when you do it? Go ahead. you.
It's visible, but you can
Mountain biking?
Yeah, I think my opposite world is actually not mountain. It's social. It's a social element. I think it's kayaking. I like it. A surf ski. It's a bit of interest, excitement, and little projects, but not at home. Projects at the beach.
That's right, that's
That
right.
sense of satisfaction
Yeah.
after I've done it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's what I'm going before. The challenge for us as a sector is most of us are in the sector because we love the sector. Right. We love cycling, swimming, motorsport. We love, and that is very much a challenge.
It's interesting. Aussie rules football was my number one, and swimming was my number two.
Yeah.
And I deliberately chose swimming because I didn't want to work in my number one. Similar to what you were saying, where I knew that if I worked 40, 50, 60 hours of footy and then wanted to go home on the weekend and play and coach footy, I would have been Australia.
Since that values aligned with burnout.
Yeah, interesting. So you're saying, like, motorsport is the passion, but you don't want to then make that your opposite world.
It's something I've done since I was 15.
Right.
I've been living with the driver.
Yeah.
Now I've made the transition over to the governance of it.
Yeah.
It's what I do.
Yeah. All right.
And I think a lot of people are in that same
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Yeah, well, it might be worth exploring things outside of that as well. If you're getting that at work. Wise what?
Reading.
Yeah.
People have asked that. That's basically just what we heard from people. So I don't read that as well. I notice there's a difference, I think, between non-fiction and fiction. I have been after I mix up. Some people saying fiction is like an opposite word.
Yeah, that's like me.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
I'd say, yeah. So I wouldn't say this is inclusive. This is the comments.
Yeah. I just thought that it would be for so many people. I would have thought that reading. Because for me, like the guys got to say, like, it's the thing that I can't think about work because I'm immersed in the story and using my imagination to think about what the characters look like and, visualising the scene that you're describing. So that's actually like using the other side of my brain.
Right.
And that works the best way.
So it does work for you. I think I have seen it's individual, so it's different for everyone. It's better working out what it is for you.
Because also I can do it like for 2 hours on a Sunday afternoon, and it makes a difference. I get two songs. It makes a difference.
So it makes a difference for Monday.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So some interesting comments and examples that I was hearing as I was going around the tables. Let's see, was there any at your table which you thought were particularly interesting? Opposite worlds, examples of, or people who are willing to share? Yeah. Yep, and questions also.
Where's the difference between opposite world and escapism? Where does... So, no, so drugs and alcohol, for example.
Yeah.
That used to be my hobby.
Yeah. I think there is some overlap, and that is why people use drugs or alcohol, because it switches you off a bit. Like, it can get you out of work mode, but as opposed to going mountain biking or reading fiction or something like that, it also comes with other costs along with it. But I think it's doing some of the same thing, and that's why people move towards it. But, you know, if you, in your 20s, you know, what does it matter? But you do it over a sustained period of time, and it starts to add up, the downsides. Whereas when you look at people who have formed an exercise habit, or they bike, or they do something over a long period of time, the benefits add up as well. So one of the challenges is getting the time to do this, or making it a high enough priority. Okay, other examples from your tables? All right. And it could be questions or just insights from your tables.
Yeah, probably more comments. What we recognise is that some of us have previously worked in the active space, in that we would be outside instructing or teaching. And then so to think about doing that as an active recovery wasn't kind of working at that time, but now that we're all generally behind desks, that's a real drive. But then the questions were scheduling it in. We often get overscheduled, and those are the first things to disappear. And so we haven't kind of shared what our active recovery is, because often that can drop off for those of us. Or if we get injured, that's the other thing, and then your thing that you do actively recover with disappears. So that was our observations.
Yeah. I think a bit of a theme around some of these things we know we enjoy, but disappearing because they're not seen as priorities. So one of the things, based on all the people we interviewed, I'd encourage you to think of your opposite world as a priority. One, because it makes you feel good, but two, it actually helps you perform sustainably over a long period of time. That's what we learned from doing the interviews. If you don't have something which switches you off and recharges you, it's very hard to keep going. It's a long game. So the people we interviewed made it a priority, not just because it was enjoyable, but because it was good for their whole life. All right, good. Other comments, questions coming up at your tables? I'd like to hear some examples of opposite worlds. Yeah? Yep. Yep.
In terms of the numbers, so being on your own,
yep.
Finding a space that was away from people, different contexts, mountainous, boat, farm, different places to go, that allowed you to completely physically disconnect from those around you as well.
Yeah.
And using that for different, I guess, methods or approaches, but that was a consistent feel here. And there was, I suppose, the danger of working in sport, people seeing coaching as an opportunity to either give back or do something that fills their bucket, but then realising actually you're just taking, again, the work context, and then you're leading a different team as opposed to the team you're leading in the 9 to 5. So awakening that kind of understanding to help feel a change around what kind of opposite world you're looking for was part of our chat here.
That seems like a really good insight. I heard that at a few tables. What is genuinely opposite for people in your sector? It's not necessarily the same as if you're in banking or you're in FMCG, you're in something like that. All right, hands are going up now. So what is genuinely opposite for people in your sector? So we'll come around these tables here.
It's one I can relate to, the being alone and the isolation, the outdoors. But then I know for me it's actually social contact. Is part of the, and it's not opposite, because social contact's a big part of my work.
Yeah.
But it's a different, undemanding social contact. There's no demand. It's a recharge from that, combined with activity. So if I don't want to go out and exercise by myself.
Yeah.
But if I'm going with others, that's my motivation factor. I will go. I've said I'll go, and then afterwards feel great.
That's a good insight, Dave. Thinking whether is it better for you to do your activity solo or with others is an important one. And it turns out the opposite thing for Dave was, does it have a demand, people wanting things from you, or is it just purely social? That's the part that was the opposite for him. They were both with people. All right, we'll come around these tables, yeah.
Oh, kia ora koutou. We had an amazing opposite where someone was a partner in one of the Big 10 accounting firms, but their opposite was to join the circus.
Oh, now we're talking.
So
Now we're getting
it enabled
warmed
them
up.
to really feel the moment, feel their body, and to quote, trust a tissue basically hanging from a ceiling. So yeah, pretty exciting.
My experience of that was it's impossible to think about work when you're 7 metres in the air hanging from your ankle.
Interesting. Connecting it back to the start of the session, that's the same thing Vivek said. He's just completely present.
Yeah.
Completely present. Connecting it back to that start of the session when we did that wakefulness, are you awake? There is something about doing activities which bring you into the present. Because much of the time in our work, we're extrapolating into the future, into the past. Opposite worlds that bring you into the present help you recover very well. Thank you.
What I didn't tell them was I then became chair of the board.
Do you want to pass it back to...
Sorry, just very quickly, just a curiosity. When I go on the treadmill, active, opposite, but at the same time I'm watching Netflix, I'm also doing passive and active at the same time.
Yeah.
Is that doubling the benefits or halving the benefits? I wonder, I don't know.
I think you'd be the judge, Ben, of what works. And I think that is true. You've got to work out for yourself what actually helps you recover. Yeah.
Our discussion was, well, mine was more about if you've got really young kids at home, your opposite world can actually be work. Work can be the escape from that. So kind of, what did you call it? The real world. Yeah. And I was going to let Brent share his opposite world.
No, I think we were just talking about things like going for a run, but the importance of nature, I suppose, around sort of going for a run on a treadmill versus actually going outside on the beach, and that sort of the role that nature plays in terms of that experience and sort of rejuvenating your well-being.
That's a great point about nature, yes. There's books on this and lots of research on this now, is the power of nature. How often can you do it?
My example, when you said about prioritising, really busy team travelling and posed a challenge, and you mentioned it up there in terms of opposite, is cold water swimming. And say we were swimming a destination, a swimming English Channel, and when you're stuck in the middle and you can't go anywhere but keep going, that pushes you to be present and you can't see the bottom. But the actual impact and the change it's made to me in terms of cold water immersion, mental health, team, connection to nature was, and I don't think I would have got in the water and done it if we weren't posed that we were going to swim and raise money for charity. So that side was really impactful for me, and I've never stopped doing it since. So.
And can I ask, how does it help you in the rest of your life or in your work, or what would it be like if you didn't do this activity?
I think for me, it made me appreciate like vulnerability of you're in a team, but you're on your own in that certain sense of in your space, in your headspace. Yeah. The unbelievable difference it makes to your body, just this happy, kind of, they call it happy hormone, but when your body has to fight to keep your energy levels to keep warm because you're in cold water, you're not wearing a wetsuit, it's that side of things. The reaction to it, it just changes this endorphin rush. So you're on a high all day. And I just didn't realise that from, I've done running, I've done loads of things, and it lasts for 5 minutes. For me, for this, it just changed the perspective that kind of anything's possible. And kind of sitting in the channel and watching refugees and people on dinghies trying to save their life, you realise that actually putting things into perspective when you're doing it just makes you go, okay, this is achievable. What we're doing is, let's put this in perspective when you're doing what you're doing.
Great. No. Is your hand going up there? Yeah.
Kia ora. Yeah, I was just following on as well. So I'm not a great runner or swimmer, but I do a lot of ultra running, a lot of ultra swimming, and ironically, my opposite world in these ultra events is probably the greatest PD I've ever had for my work without realising it. Because the presence, the scale of the problem, the mindfulness, the determination, all of whilst not in any way thinking about work, could be for multi-day events. Every single bit is applicable when I get back into work. So it's it's fascinating how it's complementing whilst distracting. So yeah, mine's a combination of nature and exercise. So I wouldn't swim in a pool and I wouldn't run on the street.
Yep.
They have to be in nature.
Yep.
But it comes back and equips me with tools for the Monday to Friday, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Ed. So, I think, so those comments there, hopefully a lot of you were already doing this but didn't have a word for it, didn't have language for it, or perhaps didn't equate that it actually makes quite a big impact for your work and performance and growth, as well as just it feels good to go in the cold water, it feels good to do the endurance, or other things. For other people it was digging ditches, it was gardening, it was reading fiction books. It doesn't need to be anything too elaborate. It often takes some exploration though, because we're habitual and we need to actually go out and explore again what that might be. So last thing I'd just say is we've focused, I think yesterday you were focusing on very big topics, the climate, the world, organisations. This morning was designed to give you a chance to focus more on yourself. Just turn it out for the last couple of minutes and think about other people around you. Think about what you've heard this morning, you've talked about with each other. How might it apply to people in your teams who you lead? How could you lead them in ways such that they could grow and perform and do it in a healthy, sustainable way? Might you have an opposite world conversation with people in your teams? It's very easy to do. Lots of managers have gone back and shared what their opposite world is and then had conversations with their teams. It can be very enlightening. Or within your organisations. What could you take back to your organisations from this? In the US, what's happening at the moment is there was a big thing around wellness culture, and we need to focus on wellness and mental well-being and these sorts of things. What's happened over there is a lot of the companies have swung back now, and they've said, we've done that, we went too far, it's got to be performance. It's all performance now. And it sort of makes sense because they need to perform, they need to deliver for their stakeholders. The question is, what sort of culture are you going to end up with? Some of them, I can see it happening because I know them well, are going towards a toxic performance culture. I would encourage you to think about how do we do both of those things really well? How could we have a high-performing, healthy culture? And many of you are the leaders of your organisations. What sort of culture could we create for everyone such that it's not just on the individuals, but it's also on us collectively, that we can have high-performance, healthy environments working? Thanks for your time. If you would like to use the assessment in your organisations or you'd like to do anything else, feel free to get in contact with me, nick@nicholaspetrie.com, and I'm happy to set you up. It's been a pleasure working with you. Thank you for your wakefulness and attention. I know it's been a long period. You're doing very well, and I think, no doubt, we're almost on break. So, thank you, Ryan.